What up, everyone? It's your boy, The Hater, and it's time for an extra video today because something happened today that The Hater knew was going to happen, but that a lot of people on the internet would have you believe was not going to happen. What I'm talking about, of course, is the complete humiliation of MMA once again at the hands of boxing. Now, I know what you're all thinking, right? Well, Francis Ngannou is not a boxer, he's an MMA guy. If only he could use his legs, he would have beaten Anthony Joshua. He could have used a hammer and he wouldn't have been able to beat Anthony Joshua, okay? It's time to stop living in make-believe land, okay? The entire UFC machine, the UFC, as a matter of fact, is a marketing company, right? The entire point of the UFC is to tell you that the people they show you are the baddest men and women on the planet. They are not. It's as simple as that, right? You know this intuitively. Intuitively, you can watch UFC and you're like, wait, what? Alexander Volkanovski is one of the toughest men on the planet? No, he isn't, all right? He's a tough man, no doubt about it. I'm not gonna sit here and just completely crap on the UFC and MMA, but I'm gonna explain to you why what happened today is exactly what's gonna happen every single time that they have these interpromotional matches. Now, on one side of the coin, you have a world champion, a former world champion, Anthony Joshua. He's beaten nearly everybody except for Fury and Usyk, right? Everybody else, and Deontay Wilder. Everybody else, he's pretty much proven himself to be better than, okay? Now, on the other side of the coin, you have Francis Ngannou, a guy who I love very much, but who tried boxing when he was younger, and it wasn't good enough, let's be real. He wasn't good enough to be a boxer, so he settled for MMA, right? Now, Francis Ngannou is a man of passion, so he wants to try it out. Now, here's what happened. First, he had a match with Tyson Fury, who was way better than Anthony Joshua, and he nearly beat him, or so people would have you believe. The fight wasn't really that close. He knocked him down once. He definitely overperformed, but he didn't beat Tyson Fury by any metric, right? Now, how could that have happened, and then how could he get destroyed earlier tonight, right? I'll tell you how. There's an element of the unknown. If I go and I fight anybody, right, they don't know what I'm going to do. They haven't seen me fight before, so they have no idea how to prepare for me. And I've made this point many times with my friends, that you only get one of those, right? This is what happens when there is this huge upset of some relative nobody almost beating a champion or beating a champion. This is, in fact, the premise of the movie Rocky Balboa, or Rocky, I should say, right? The whole point is Rocky can almost beat Apollo Creed because Apollo Creed doesn't take Rocky seriously, and he has no tape to study of Rocky because Rocky was a jobber, right? Whereas Rocky, this is obviously underplayed in the movie, Rocky has the capacity to study everything that Apollo Creed has done, right? That's what happened in the first fight. But lo and behold, cucks, what happens after that is you have video footage now of Francis Ngannou actually in a boxing match. So what AJ did, Anthony Joshua, what he did was he studied this and he found many weaknesses and many openings that he could exploit, and exploit them he did. Now, why couldn't Francis Ngannou do the same? He could also watch, and I'm sure he did, Anthony Joshua boxing matches and see where his weaknesses are. He could do the same, and in fact, I'm certain he did. But the difference is this. There are levels to it. MMA, as I've been saying subtly in this channel, and I like MMA, I would consider myself to be a UFC fan, but MMA is the last drop of the funnel, right? When you fail at a real sport, you settle for MMA. When you fail, like let's say Brock Lesnar, he wanted to go and be a football player. He's not good enough. I mean, quite frankly, he's not athletic enough to be in the NFL because the people that he's competing with are people that have been doing this and been training and been working hard at being NFL players for their whole lives. Lesnar hasn't. No doubt about it that if you took Lesnar from birth and you're like, we need you to be like an NFL player, of course he could do it. Of course LeBron could be like the best tight end of all time if you took him and crafted him as such, right? But you didn't, and that's the difference, right? With sports like MMA, you have a bunch of people who have had mild or no success in their first sports, and then they're like, oh, I have no other skills. I'm not good enough to be a world champion in my sport. There are some exceptions. I know what you're thinking. Oh, Pereira. Oh, Henry Cejudo. Yeah, and they're two of the best ever now. You know what I'm saying? Because when you're excellent at something, you get the skills of that something, and you can leverage that in a sport where those skills are relevant. Francis Ngannou, whom I like, is not excellent at anything. He is a C-level striker at best, right? In the UFC, he's like an A-level striker. But in reality, he's like a C-level striker who thought he could hang with A-level strikers. And he had his one opportunity, right? When you don't know what kind of C-level striker you're gonna get, you're gonna do your best and you're gonna pull it through, right? There's other factors as well, of course. But now it's over. The cat is out of the bag. Francis Ngannou will never win a boxing match. Like, you could take, and I'm not exaggerating, you could take a legitimate, like, college level champion. You can take like the Golden Gloves heavyweight champion and he would probably beat Francis Ngannou in boxing, right? That's what would happen because one person has trained for years and maybe for their whole life to do this, and Ngannou is picking it up as a hobby. That's the difference, right? In the UFC and in MMA, people like Dana White, who I also like and respect, they say things like, this is where the toughest guys are. And we all know this, again, intuitively, not to be true. When Ronda Rousey was the women's champion in UFC, they kept saying, they're like, oh, I think she could destroy Floyd Mayweather. Oh, I think she could beat Ray Rice. Because Ray Rice like beat his wife in an elevator and Ronda Rousey was like, if it was me, it would be different. No, it wouldn't. Right? He would bounce Ronda Rousey's head against the elevator door 100 times if he wanted to, and there's nothing she could do about it because there are levels to it, right? For her level, she's great, right? But there are levels to it. Someone who is good, and once they figure you out, it's over, right? And why are there levels to it? Well, MMA is a very, very new sport. The Hater was a sophomore in high school when the first Ultimate Fighter, the first season came out, right? And that's when MMA really started kicking off. I know you're thinking, oh, Royce Gracie. Sure, the Hater liked UFC before that, but that's when it started to get big, right? And shortly thereafter, I went to college and I started doing boxing. And I got into really, 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 really good shape. My friend and I decided to go to this BJJ gym, right? And everyone there, compared to me, was completely out of shape. Like those people would make it through one boxing workout, let alone like do it for years like I did, right? It would be impossible. They were not in good enough shape, right? Because the standards are different. Boxing, football, basketball, these are sports that are taken seriously all over the world, or at least in America, they're taken very seriously, right? As a result, the funnel for people that want to be the world champion in boxing is very broad. Every man at some point has wanted to be the Lionel Messi, right? Every man has wanted to be the guy that wins the World Cup for his nation. But most of us don't have that capacity, right? That's why the funnel involves 3 billion men, 4 billion men that wanted to do this. And out of that funnel, one man comes out, Messi. The funnel for MMA is like 40,000 people, and they're all self-selected from people that have not succeeded in their sports. It's as simple as that. Francis Ngannou, the story goes, if you believe the UFC story, is that he wanted to be a world heavyweight champion in boxing, but then people told him, you be better at MMA. The truth is, he wanted to be a world champion boxer. He tried doing that, he tried training. He realized he probably wasn't even good enough in the gym. So he went to MMA, where you don't need these like deep skills, right? And to prove this, I will use 2 examples. One is a real life example, and the other one is an analogy based on an event that I just remembered. Last UFC pay-per-view, Ilya Topuria beat Alexander Volkanovski, and now his star is shining brighter than ever. The problem is, if you go back and watch the knockout, essentially Ilya Topuria is wailing his arms. He's doing what's in boxing, what's called a 2-3 combo. He's just doing left hook, right hook, right hook. Eventually he hits him, right? This is the fundamental equivalent. If you remember back in the day in arcades, you could go and play Tekken, right? And you could, or whatever, Marvel vs. Capcom. Let's take Tekken, right? Someone could come in and, get like a 10, 15 win streak against other people in the arcade. Then a child can come in, they can put their 2 quarters in the machine, and they can fight or play this guy who's really, really good, right? Obviously the guy's better than the kid at Tekken, but if the kid button mashes, right, the kid has a chance. What Ilya Topuria did, and what Francis Ngannou has been doing these last 2 fights, is button mash, right? Now, the reason why I bring up button mashing is because with button mashing, you have a small chance of winning against someone who's good. If you're better than button mashing, you have no chance. This is a perfect analogy. If someone knows that you're not button mashing, like I played this guy at Tekken, and he was better than me, right? But I was good. So I was doing the moves that I knew, And because he's familiar with the game, he knows the moves I'm gonna do. So he's able to quickly predict them, counter, block, and beat me, right? The next person that comes in is a kid who was playing for his first time. The kid almost beat the guy. He didn't beat him, but he almost beat him. He took one round from him in Tekken, right? And then afterwards, the guy finally was able to beat the kid. Everyone was like, wow. And then the guy was like, yeah, this game doesn't control for the fact that you can button mash your way to victory, because if you're just button mashing, the other guy has no idea what you're doing because you have no idea what you're doing, right? But that only works for one game, maybe two. Because once he realizes that all you're doing is button mashing, then he's gonna take a more sturdy approach and defeat you 50,000 times in a row, right? Whereas for me, he's gonna beat me the first time, but if we play 100 games, I'll probably win 30 or 40. And he'll win 60 or 70, right? Against this kid, he has a much higher chance of losing the first one, but then he's not losing ever again. So that's exactly what happens in MMA, right? That's why there's no champion in MMA who's champion for except for John Jones, who's champion for 10 years, right? Or Anderson Silva. There's a few good ones. Not everyone's a jobber, obviously, right? But there's not many long-reigning champions because there is a significant element of luck. Now, the good news is that as MMA grows, there's gonna be some people, and maybe they're starting now, people whose goal has been and will be to be UFC champion, right? And that's when MMA is gonna get good. As a fighting art, it goes without saying that if you know how to use your hands, your knees, your legs, and grapple, even though boxers know a lot about grappling, it's called clinching, look it up, cucks. If you know everything to an A level, you're of course gonna beat someone who has striking at an A level. But the problem is, and here's the biggest lie that's ever told by the UFC, they look at you in the face and they straight up lie to you. They'll say things like, they're like, oh, Habib Nurmagomedov's grappling is world class. No, it isn't. If you put him against the best wrestler at my university right now, the best wrestler at my university would murder him, okay? He would murder him in wrestling. Khabib's grappling is good for the UFC, right? Where it's filled with a bunch of Division II athletes. Like Kamaru Usman, oh, he's the welterweight GOAT. Kamaru Usman is a Division II wrestler, right? There's 25 people, right, at the university that I went, down the street, right? Well, a few exits down the highway, I guess, right, at this point, right? There's 25 people that would beat him in wrestling, easily. He wouldn't even have any chance, right? But UFC tells you, oh, this guy is elite, right? Once in a while, you do get some people that are elite. For the most part, when you see oh, this guy is an elite striker, chances are he's at the level of where you would be if you trained seriously for 2 or 3 years at striking. That's where they're at, right? Because they don't have time and they don't have the energy to train all these skills forever. You can go, there's a book that one of my friends got me for one of my birthdays many years ago. And it was a book of boxing workouts from all the champions up until that point. Obviously not all of them, but a lot of the champions, right? And you can go look at Roy Jones Jr., his workout, right? His workout entails him waking up at 5, running 9 miles, getting up, hitting the weights, sparring for 30 rounds, going home, right? Eating a light dinner, and then playing 3 hours of basketball because that was one of his hobbies. And then he sleeps after that. He maybe watches a movie. He sleeps and does the same thing again, right? All of this is to craft one Roy Jones, who's obviously one of the best ever. Do you think that Conor McGregor has ever done that? Do you really believe, oh, motivated McGregor would know he did? Well, he doesn't. He trains for 3 hours in the morning, maybe 3 hours at night, right? And he hits the weights every couple days, right? He is not at that level, right? He's not physically at that level, and he is not athletically at that level. And that's the last thing that I want to talk about. Athleticism is the most important attribute in all sports. We all know a friend, or maybe a sibling, perhaps a cousin, who isn't very good at a specific sport, but because they're so freakishly athletic, they'll figure it out. They'll pick it up and they'll dominate you, right? You can have kids who are 5'4", play basketball for 15 years, right? And they're 15, they're 5'4", and you can bring a 6'3" person who's never played basketball and he'll dunk on them, right? There are limits to what the body is capable of doing. And because the vetting mechanisms of boxing and UFC and soccer are completely different, it goes to follow that the bar to become champion in the UFC is much, much lower than it is to, let's say, become world champion in, I don't know, soccer, right? Look at Messi, right? It took Messi like an entire career to finally be able to win the World Cup. And he almost didn't win, right? Meanwhile, in UFC, you have Alex Pereira from Brazil, who comes in, he's had like 10 fights, 10 MMA fights, and he's a 2-division champion. He's already one of the best ever in 10 fights. Messi had to play like thousands of games throughout his career to get to that point, to be a world champion. This guy has to do it 10 times. Why? Because the competition is so weak that all you gotta do is beat 3 guys and you're the world champ. You can literally come into the UFC, right? Get 2 wins and be like, I wanna be the champion now, and you can become the champion, right? In no other sport is this possible. So, for those of you that are unfortunate and bet money that Ngannou was gonna win, you should have asked your boy. That's what happens when you don't understand how these things work. Now, my gripe is with people that go and talk about these things, have never had any combat experience, right? But they go and talk about these things. Oh, like he lost because of this. Oh, unmotivated Conor McGregor. None of these things are true. You're being lied to hold up an illusion. The illusion is that, and the illusion has to be held up because you know intuitively that it's not true. You know intuitively that Forrest Griffin is a UFC world champion, but that Forrest Griffin is nothing special. Like Forrest Griffin would never be a champion in literally anything else in the history of the world. He would never be a world champion, basketball player, soccer, anything. He doesn't have the athleticism, right? Like that's the problem here. There are some people that are athletically gifted and they work their whole lives to do that, right? Go look up Alexander Karelin or even Kurt Angle, right? Look at these guys. Like if Kurt Angle wanted, like if he was like 29, when he was 29, if he wanted to go to the UFC, he would have murdered people like Chuck Liddell. He would have murdered Randy Couture. He would have beaten all those guys senseless. Not because he's a better wrestler and they can't handle his takedowns. That would, of course, be part of it. But because he is athletically superior. It just comes down to that, Cucks. It just comes down to that. You look at these like alpha athletes. There's a few. We're lucky to have a few around right now. J.J. Watt, LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo, Erling Haaland, right? There's a few where you're like, dude, these people are just built different, right? They're just like, even Tyreek Hill for what he does, right? These are alpha athletes. It's very difficult to replicate what they do, right? Because there are levels to it. And the levels are not just your ability to train and your ability to learn and your ability to improve. There are genetic levels to athleticism, right? Brock Lesnar, steroids, of course. I mean, most likely, I guess. We don't know for a fact, right? But he's also a freak of nature. Like the two are not mutually exclusive. You and I can take steroids all we want. We're not going to look like Brock Lesnar, right? It's not in the cards. You understand me, Cucks? And that's the problem with what happened today between Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou. The idea is, fundamentally, the idea is this. And you're going to hear people talk about it. Like, oh, it doesn't mean anything. If they could use kicks, Francis Ngannou would headlock him. He would do absolutely none of those things because he's not athletic enough. Yes, of course, he can go beat up Stipe Miocic, right, who is a legend in MMA, and he's a part-time firefighter. He looks like someone's dad. Like, that guy is a world champion in UFC. He's one of the best ever in UFC. But that's the UFC, right? That's the UFC. It's one step away from children's competition. So this idea that, and people treat him like gods. They're like, oh, this 5'1", 115-pound UFC champion can beat up like Bradley Martin, who's like 6'4" and like 260 pounds. No, he can't, okay? Don't live in fantasy land where the unproven is something you just accept. You just accept that a man the size of a child is gonna beat like there was a video I saw, I'll leave it with this. That monster, the guy from Game of Thrones or whatever, that Half-Thor, whatever his name is, that like the mountain or whatever, that guy is just an enormous human being. Like, he's one of the biggest people of all time, right? And this guy was like, I could kill Conor McGregor in 15 seconds. And you wouldn't believe the comments. Comments were like, Conor McGregor would leg kick him. Conor McGregor can hit him in the knee with a 2x4, and this guy wouldn't feel it because he is a literal mountain of muscle. You understand me? These fantasies where a small man can kick someone in the leg and break their leg are not real. This is make-believe land. And it's gotten to the point where there's a video circling like the internet of Eddie Hall, who's like the strongest man in the world, apparently, and he's getting leg kicked by a kid. Now, Eddie Hall is trying to be nice, and he sells it like the kid hurt him, right? And people took it seriously. Like, you really believe that a kid kicking the strongest man in the world in the leg is gonna have any effect? That is absurd if you believe that, right? And that's all I gotta say about that, cucks. With that being said, when you make bets, if you are into that like the hater is sometimes, be sure to think about what is being told to you and what is real, right? Your intuition is not gonna lead you wrong. The fact is, you have people like Jake Paul, who with 3 years of training, simply because he's athletically superior, he can go in there and beat up Tyron Woodley, who at one point was considered one of the best ever in the UFC, right? The best of all time. The same Tyron Woodley lost to a science teacher in an obstacle course. Now, Tyron Woodley is athletic, but he is not especially so. Like, if you took, like Sean Strickland, everybody likes Sean Strickland, I do sometimes too, right? Like Sean Strickland, he even said it in the Joe Rogan podcast. He was like, this isn't anything special. He's like, the MMA is the everyman sport. And he said it. He's like, if someone told me, hey, you have to go be a football player, he's like, there's a 0 chance I'd be able to do it, right? But he can be a UFC champion even, right? Now, if you took Sean Strickland and you put him to like fight Canelo Alvarez, oh, he would leg kick him. What would happen is this. Exactly what happened today with Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou. That's exactly what would happen. Maybe there's going to be a period of feeling out because it's a boxing match, but if Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua fought in the streets, Anthony Joshua's not going to throw like boxing punches. He's going to go wail on him and knock him out in 3 seconds, right? But because this is a boxing match, you have to be careful, right? There's other things, there's other considerations. Same thing. You could take someone like Sean Strickland, the middleweight champion. Canelo Alvarez would pulverize him. He would pulverize Anderson Silva. He would pulverize Dricus Duplessis. He would murder Israel Adesanya in moments. In moments, guys. In moments. That's all I got to say about that, cucks.